Welcome to This Explainer. Right now, we're cracking open the ultimate master reference for the marine engine room. We're going to take all that abstract, heavy mathematics you might find in a dry textbook and connect it directly to the absolute life-or-death realities of running massive machinery out at sea. If you've ever wondered how engineers actually manage thousands of tons of steel, volatile fuel, and boiling water while they're hundreds of miles away from land, well, this is absolutely for you.
15 and 45. Now, these aren't just random, arbitrary numbers. Out in the marine engineering world, these two very specific figures literally represent the razor-thin margins between a totally safe, routine voyage, a catastrophic collision, or, even a personal criminal prosecution. We'll get into exactly what those stakes are in just a few minutes.
So think about this. What really keeps a massive ship from just breaking apart at sea? Is it just incredibly thick steel and sheer luck? Actually, no way. The real answer lies in strict, unbending adherence to a handful of core mathematical formulas and golden rules. We're going to explore this across three critical domains today: power, fluids, and control. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Powering the prime mover. Equation to reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we look at those massive prime movers, the towering diesel engines that physically propel the ship through the ocean, every single engineer needs to know the raw power being developed right inside the cylinder. That's where the indicated power formula comes in. Basically, you take the mean effective pressure, multiply it by the length of the piston stroke, the area of the piston, the number of power strokes per second, and finally the number of cylinders. It is this beautiful, elegant mathematical way to translate raw explosive gas pressure into the exact kilowatt output of a colossal engine.
But let's bring that power generation equation straight back to a pretty terrifying reality. With all that immense power comes immense heat and friction. Enter the crankcase explosion rule. Say you have a slipping bearing. That friction can actually vaporize the lubricating oil into a really dense, hot mist. Now, if an engineer suspects an overheat and hastily opens a hot crankcase door, fresh oxygen instantly rushes in. The result? A historically fatal explosion. You literally must always let it cool down first. The math is what creates the power, but it's the discipline that keeps you alive.
Section 2. Fluids, pumps, and cavitation.
You really have to think of a ship as a floating city that's constantly moving tens of thousands of tons of fluids. We're talking cooling water, fuel, ballast water, and to do all this heavy lifting, we rely on two main workhorses. On one hand, you've got displacement pumps. Think of these as physically shoving discrete, fixed gulps of fluid forward. They're amazing for self-priming and extreme precision, but on the other hand, centrifugal pumps spin incredibly fast, basically flinging the fluid outward to move massive volumes, kind of like shifting thousands of tons of ballast water. But here's the catch. That high flow capability comes with a very hidden danger.
And that specific danger is predicted by something called net positive suction head, or NPSH, available. This equation calculates the critical margin between the actual pressure at the pump's suction and the fluid's vapor pressure. Basically, if your available suction head drops below what the pump actually requires to operate, you cross a very, very dangerous threshold.
And this brilliantly illustrates the physics at play here. Think of the classic milkshake problem, just on a massive industrial scale. If you pull too hard through a really narrow straw, you end up creating a vacuum, right? Well, in a centrifugal pump, that drop in pressure, not an increase in heat, but the pressure drop, literally boils the cold water. Vacuum bubbles form and then they violently collapse right against the metal impeller. It's a phenomenon called cavitation, and it will quite literally chew the metal apart over time.
Because of how destructive that is, marine engineers live by the NPSH margin rule. If you ever hear this distinctive, rattling, gravelly noise coming from your pump, do not immediately assume the impeller is just mechanically broken. That sound? It's actually your earliest, cheapest diagnostic tool. It means you're cavitating, so you always check your suction strainers, your valves, and your tank levels first before tearing the pump apart.
Speaking of fluid control, let's look back at that number 15 we mentioned right at the start. This is the 15 ppm rule. Under international law, any bilge water discharged overboard must absolutely not contain more than 15 parts per million of oil. Continuously monitored by an automatic meter, bypassing this system to discharge dirty water, which is famously known in the industry as a magic pipe offense, carries severe personal criminal liability for the engineers involved. We're not just talking about losing your job here. You can actually go to prison for this.
Section 3. Steering and process control.
Okay, to tame the complex, totally chaotic systems on board and to physically steer the massive vessel itself, engineers rely heavily on closed-loop control systems. Think of it as a never-ending three-way conversation. First, the transmitter or sensor says, hey, here's what is actually happening right now. Then the comparator looks at that and says, okay, here's how far off we are from our set point, what we actually want. Finally, the correcting unit, which is usually a valve, says, got it, I'm making the adjustment, and it just repeats this continuous loop forever.
Now this whole conversation scales up into what's called a PID controller. The formula might look a little intimidating, but honestly, it's really just the brain behind that process we just talked about. It uses 3 specific actions to tune for speed and stability. You've got proportional correction, giving a nudge based on how far off you currently are. Then there's integral adjustment, which is much more patient, accumulating a fix over time to squeeze out those tiny, lingering errors. And finally, derivative anticipation, which actually watches how fast the error is changing so you don't overshoot your target. Working together, they smoothly stabilize temperature, pressure, and flow all across the ship. But here's the thing, all that internal process control means absolutely nothing if the bridge can't actually point the ship where it needs to go. The steering gear is basically the massive hydraulic muscle that physically moves the rudder against the incredible resistance of the ocean. And that brings us perfectly to our second mystery number from earlier. 45 seconds. International safety law strictly mandates that every steering gear system has to have twin independent backup power units. So, if the primary system fails, an automatic changeover must restore full steering control within exactly 45 seconds, not a minute. Not whenever you get to it, 45 seconds. Why? Because a massive cargo ship that cannot steer for more than a minute is a ship that is almost certainly going to cause a catastrophic collision.
Section 4. Golden Rules of Survival. To wrap up this explainer, we're going to do a rapid-fire summary of the absolute non-negotiable rules every single marine engineer must have permanently burned into their memory. First up, the fire triangle. Heat, fuel, and oxygen. Remove just one side of that triangle and the fire goes out, period. Second, the low water rule. If a steam boiler runs dry, never, ever add cold feed water to it. The thermal shock will rupture those overheated tubes like a bomb going off. You have to secure the firing first. Third, the TBN reserve rule. You must track your lube oil's invisible capacity to neutralize acid through lab analysis. Otherwise, your engine will literally eat itself from the inside out. And finally, the synchronizing rule. Before connecting a generator to a live electrical bus, you absolutely have to match the voltage, frequency, and phase perfectly, or you risk some truly devastating mechanical and electrical damage. So, the crucial point is that all of these physical laws and rules culminate in one ultimate guiding philosophy, the trend before alarm rule. Basically, a parameter that is trending steadily upward, even if it's technically still within safe limits, is a far earlier, much more valuable warning than just waiting for a red light to flash or a siren to go off. True proactive engineering is all about acting on the trend. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. And honestly, this applies whether you're managing a massive, towering diesel engine or just navigating the complex systems in your own day-to-day profession. In an engine room full of alarms, are you actually watching the trend? Or are you just sitting there waiting for the siren? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.